The outdoors is not separate from us.
You become part of nature, which we all are. We just think we're separate.
And I think we realize that more and more as we fall off a cliff into lives controlled by phones, AI, and social media.
We could just sit here in the dirt together for a couple hours and have a strangely deep connection.
The point is, how you experience the outdoors does not have to be determined by anyone else but you.
You don't go into these places and emerge unchanged.
Hey, everyone. I want to thank you for listening to Open Container and ask that you please subscribe to the show by clicking follow on the podcast app you're using right now. Following the podcast is the best way to ensure that we will continue to crack open the container every single week. Thanks, and let's get back to the show. Welcome to Open Container. I'm Doug Schnitzbahn. I'm a journalist, writer, and overall lover of the outdoors. I fought wildfires, reported on national politics, published magazines, and my gear garage has more gravitational pull than a black hole. On this podcast, we're going to have an open conversation about culture, conservation, policy, business, issues that matter the most to the outdoor community. Let's get some. When we started this podcast, we had a definite plan. We wanted to show that the outdoors isn't just a niche. It's part of the fabric of our day-to-day lives as Americans. I think that's true whether you're someone who's turned your back on the mad rush of it all, living out of your van, biking to Moab, skiing Jackson, or whether you live in New York City and occasionally slip away to ride your bike along the Hudson River Greenway. This world is always asking, always has us scrolling, but it rarely gives us much in return. The outdoors does. My first outdoor memories began on a dead-end street, Salem Lane in the little town of Little Silver, New Jersey, not far from a brackish creek. When I was young, there were still horses in a pasture at the end of the next street. In my yard, an only child at the time, 5 or 6 years old, I'd play under the holly trees. I'd go with the Bowies, our neighbors, into the woods behind their house. We'd play games and crawl through tunnels of leaves under the towering maples and oaks, remnants of the forests the first Europeans coveted when they landed here and soon cut down. There was something so grounding, so basic about playing in those woods. I remember once finding a dead bird. I was both scared and fascinated by what lay outside the safety of the house. Most of all, I remember Billy Bowie. He was a few years older than me, the coolest kid alive in my mind. He had a banana board skateboard and wore a Davy Crockett hat. He took me into his world, showed me different bark on trees, hidden paths only he knew, and one place in particular that he called the Honeysuckle Factory. It was legendary, so much so that I didn't believe it existed until he brought me there. I can still see it now, though it feels like some dreamscape. A place where we could both climb into a tree and look down, where honeysuckle vines had overtaken everything. We'd pull the pistils through the flowers, taste the sweetness, and sit there in the quiet joy of summer afternoons. Later, the outdoors meant the beach. I'd go with my dad. We'd spin cast for stripers and bluefish off the jetties of Sandy Hook. From these long, quiet beaches, you could see the towers of New York City in the distance across the bay. When I was in college and after in Boston, bartending, unsure where life was going, I found salvation in skiing, Franconia Notch, Loon Mountain. My friend Mark, who lived in Jackson Hole, introduced me to telemark skiing, this more advanced, fluid way of moving through the mountains. I was hooked. Not just on skiing, but on finding a life in the mountains, an art of motion in the outdoors. But again, the outdoors doesn't have to be dangerous or difficult. Though, let's be honest, there's always a pull to that part of it too. The outdoors is open to everyone. And I don't say that to dilute the concept. I know some worry if the outdoors is everything, then maybe it's nothing. But of course, it's what you make of it. A personal relationship, a unique way to interact with the natural world. That's why we go, to find ourselves, often alone, where we can just be, without pressure, without performance. We don't even have to go with family or friends or loved ones. We can just be another creature within the boundless beauty of existence. Or maybe we do go with others to share in that communion. The discovery of a new flower's name, a faster lap on the trail, a summit we always dreamed about from some forgotten back road. This basic way of being resonates with people across the US and across the globe. Especially now on a smaller, rapidly shrinking Earth, we're beginning to understand it's not just about saving the planet. It's about becoming a better part of the ecosystem, understanding what it means to be alive in this place. You can do whatever you want. You can mountain bike Rabbit Valley, suck your camelback dry, stop to fix a pinch flat. You can skate ski, learn the subtle intricacies of movement and breath, support local clubs that keep trails open, or head to a resort and carve silent loops through pine trees, cold air burning in your lungs. You can birdwatch in New York City, go to Central Park. Maybe you'll see a black-crowned night heron scoop up and eat a rat. Maybe you'll just watch the life that buzzes between garbage and gutters beneath the canyons of concrete and glass. You can go forest bathing. The Japanese call it Shinrin-yoku, just walking among the trees, letting go of thought, inhaling the breath of a forest built on chlorophyll and rooted in soil rich with fungi and rhizomes and mystery. You can be a part of that. You can climb wilderness peaks, load your pack with everything you need to survive a few days, press your hands against rock, face deadly exposure, and stand in the sky. You can take your paddleboard into the Pacific off San Diego, ride your e-bike through community trails, run and time yourself on Strava, hike without a plan, or plan a through hike, maybe the CDT from Mexico to Canada along the spine of the Rockies. You can throw a frisbee, you can geocache, you can paddle the Potomac and feel the tug of whitewater so close to the capital. You can bring your children to a quiet lake, let them dip small feet in the water, let them feel the miracle of simply being alive. You can fly fish on the fabled rivers of Montana's Madison, drift boat downstream, casting the fat browns tucked under grassy banks. You can hunt elk in the mountains, honoring a tradition passed through your family or rediscovering something ancient, the communion between human and animal. You can find shapes in clouds. You can simply breathe. The point is, how you experience the outdoors does not have to be determined by anyone else but you. That's the beauty. That's the freedom. That's why we go. My guest today has pioneered her own way in the outdoors. Shawnté Salabert is a Los Angeles-based writer and author of Hiking the Pacific Crest Trail, Southern California. Her work appears in Backpacker, Outside, Alpinist, Adventure Journal, REI Co-op Journal, and Los Angeles Magazine. She is also co-host of the Rock Fight podcast and the host for a new show about to appear on our network, Gear Abby. She explores themes of adventure, environmental stewardship, place-based culture, and the human connection to wild landscapes, blending rich storytelling with field-earned insight. So let's open the container with Shawnté Salabert. I am extremely excited to pop open the container with Shawnté Salabert, queen of the rock fight, reigning champion of our polls there, our own Gear Abby, and an incredible force in her own right in both the music world and also the outdoor world. Shawnté, pop it open.
Wow. Thanks, Doug. What an intro. I mean, I'm going to throw it back to you and say I am deeply honored to be here on your pod. I love it. I've told Colin many times that listening to your opens is very therapeutic for me.
I believe the open captures your spirit of redefining and having a very open idea of what the outdoors is.
Yeah, that's really important to me. I mean, you know, I have been, as far as my outdoor industry connections, you know, I've been an outdoor author and journalist for, gosh, I don't even remember how long it's been now. I don't know, 15 years, maybe 14. My road to the outdoors was not probably the same as a lot of other people. I grew up in the inner city in Milwaukee, Boys and Girls Club across the street. So it wasn't something that was a huge part of my life in the traditional sense, but I was always outside, you know. So I appreciate you thinking about me in that sort of outside the box sense.
You're a rock star, right? I think we all like to think of ourselves, or in some way, in this weird way, we like to frame our own lives and paths of our lives as rock stars. I think you've done that quite well in what you've done.
Yeah, I've lived a pretty unusual life thus far, and I don't think that will change anytime soon. And I'm pretty grateful for it. So, yeah, it's pretty wild to straddle the music world and the outdoor world, and it feels a bit like a pinch me dream come true. So I always joke that I lead a double life.
Well, one of the things I think is a big focus of your life, no matter what, is through hiking and the John Muir Trail, the Numupoyo Trail. Why don't you just tell us what is the real magic of a long walk, of a through hike, of a multiple day, really committed hike?
I love the action of getting out there. For me, the long hike, long walk is really about being present. So I have long thought of hiking as a sort of walking meditation. You know, day hikes are wonderful, and I'm out just about every day walking, hiking, trail running. Here, I live in Pasadena, Southern California. But there's something about going out for not just one night. One night is wonderful. I find at least 2 nights gives you that chance to be sandwiched in the midst of no cell phone service, perhaps no Wi-Fi, no technology other than whatever you decide to carry with you. And you become real present. So when you talk about taking a long hike, a long walk, that's magnified, it's amplified. And so for me, it's this chance to go really deep with myself. It's a chance to disconnect from all the noise. You know, I live in LA. I spent a few months on the PCT back in 2015 for the first time, and that was in service of a guidebook that I wrote. And that experience was it was jarring to come back to LA after being out there and have your life whittled down to a very simple format. You know, you wake up, eat a little something, take down your camp, start walking, stop wherever you think you feel like you want to stop for breaks, for lunch, whatever, find camp, reverse course. And your life out there becomes very streamlined. You become attuned to the rhythms of nature. You become part of nature, which we all are. We just think we're separate. So for me, these long walks are an opportunity to get closest to myself without all of the distractions of everyday life. There's no, like the billboards, the metaphoric billboards that are always sort of blaring at us, whether that's our inbox notifications, text messages, things like that. Capitalism always telling us we've got more things to buy and to work hard for work's sake, as we like to do in America. Out there, I can be a little wildland creature. I can be little feral marmot loving lady animal. I feel almost like my little kid self when I go on a long trail. And I feel like you see that a lot when you get together with other through hikers. There is this sort of sense, and it's not a sense of being juvenile, although that absolutely exists in a lot of places. It's a sense of that freedom you had when you were a kid for a lot of us, not everybody, but that freedom you had to sort of be dirty and not worry about it, to wear the same clothes day after day, to investigate bugs and plants and flowers and trees that interest you, to sit on a rock if you want to sit on a rock. So it really takes me back to my sort of elemental self. And it brings me, I come back into the world, calmer version of myself, maybe more introspective. I also just want to get rid of everything in my house when I get home. So there's so much I love about it. And obviously, I just love being in nature. So
I love that idea of childishness too, because I mean, when we think about it, all of everything we're doing in our normal day-to-day adult life is really pretty prescribed, right? Our ability to do what we want is taken away. And when you're out in the wild, that is removed and you can really live how you want to live, which is the way a child lives in the best of ways, right?
Right. Yeah, it does. And again, I'll say not everybody has had that opportunity. Not everybody had childhoods where they had moments like that even. But I do think there's a sense that when you're a kid, you don't know about a lot of these frameworks that are already set up for us in the world. We live within all of these paradigms, all these systems that have been created long before we existed, that continue developing and getting larger and more cumbersome. And as a child, you don't know about this stuff. You don't really feel the full weight of it until you get a little older. And so, yeah, it's that sense of freedom from childhood that I think about out there, is because you can go out on a weekend trip and completely forget about my inbox, which is an absolute blessing. It's why I will always take people hiking with me if they want to go. I'm like, if you get a chance to just have one little iota of this, I want it for you.
These simple tasks take on a sort of joy, like having to wash your jet boil or something like that. There's a Zen joy to just having to be responsible for those little details, right?
I find a joy in those tasks. I love setting up camp, taking down camp, boiling water, filtering water. It's silly because it's kind of repetitive in a way. It just becomes part of your day. But it's simple. It's easy. I need clean water. This is what I could do to get it. I've got to go to the bathroom. This is how I'm going to go. Yeah, it's nice. And you come home and suddenly you've got a lot of things online you've got to manage. You've got a household you've got to manage, bills and requirements and this, that, and the other thing. And you're being advertised to the second you get back in your car, really, in a lot of ways.
One thing I love about it too is there's no money involved during the day, right? I mean, of course, you have to spend money to buy gear to get there. You have to have a certain level of privilege just to be able to take off for a few days on the trail, right? But there's something wonderful. Like I always say, I'd love a day when I don't spend money and I don't drive my car.
Oh my gosh, it's the best. It's one of the reasons I started walking a lot more in my neighborhood to run errands, just that idea of not getting in the car and just moving on my feet at human speed, at human scale. Moving in my own neighborhood is very similar for me. I can have very meditative experiences just walking around Pasadena. But yeah, I love that aspect of it. But I also love when you get into very specifically sort of the thru hiking community and even just, you could say the backpacking community, but in specific areas. So along a trail like the JMT Numupoyo is a Paiute phrase that means kind of the people's path or the people's road. But when you're out on a trail like that has kind of this cachet about it. People know it. It's a bucket list sort of place. There's also a culture that develops around these trails that's really interesting. And so you have a culture of sharing information, but also snacks, food, gear. I've camped when I was out on the trail this summer, the night before my birthday. I was out hiking alone for the whole trip, but I met people here and there along the way. And I camped with these two folks the night before my birthday. And we made small talk as I set up my tent, but then we suddenly started having deeper conversations. Turns out they both work in the climate world. One of them is a climate lawyer who had to go to The Hague after their trip to hear the International Court of Justice ruling on whether countries were responsible for their contributions to climate change. Pretty incredible stuff. But so, we ended up getting into this deeper, more philosophical discussion. And then soon enough, the three of us are sitting there. They're brewing me tea out of their stash. I'm sharing like freeze-dried cheese that I had with me. We're talking about Cheetos, very important stuff. So there's more of a sharing economy, if you want to put it that way, that can happen when you're backpacking or on a long trail where there's a culture built around inherent trust. And again, not everybody's going to feel that when they step foot on a trail, or at least maybe not in the beginning for various reasons. But there is a lot of that to be found out there if you're open to it and if you want to participate in going outside of yourself. So some people really want to go on a long hike and don't talk to me, leave me alone. I've encountered those people very kind of shut off, very insular, and that's okay. They're having their own experience out there. But yeah, I love those opportunities to we don't need to spend money and we don't need to do all these other things. We don't need to even look a certain way. We could just sit here in the dirt together for a couple hours and have a strangely deep connection.
And that connects to something you said earlier, and I think it connects to your own personal story too. I'm curious about this. Not every child gets to have that experience, right, of connecting to the outdoors in some way, which is sad to think about. And you said you grew up single mom, kind of rough neighborhood. How did you first get your first outdoor experience? Where did it catch for you?
Well, it's interesting because I think when we talk about the outdoors, kind of capital O outdoors, you hear a lot of people talking about backpacking like we're doing right now, hiking, cycling, like mountain biking, trail running, skiing, paddle sports. What doesn't get talked about is that for a lot of us, our initial outdoor experiences were in our neighborhoods growing up. So in, 80s latchkey kid, and I was running around with my friends playing in the alley because that's what we had right there, playing in our backyards, going to the Boys and Girls Club across the street, walking to some of the neighborhood parks. I grew up in Milwaukee, which has an incredible park system. And so for me, those original outdoor, quote, maybe small O to some people experiences, those were my outdoor experiences. Having birthday parties in the park, going to people's quinceañeras, like in parks. A lot of stuff happened in the city parks or in our backyards. But we were outside all day. That's what we did back then. We didn't have, we maybe had Atari or something, but we didn't really have screens to hold our attention. I could have easily sat, like every night I would sit inside with a book instead of watching TV because that was the kind of kid I was and kind of the kind of adult I remain today. But yeah, it was a different time too. So that idea of just being a feral little critter running around my neighborhood, that was outside too.
I mean, it was kind of linked too, right? Like you could find the microdot in Adventure on your Atari.
Yeah.
But then outside, when you were outside, when the parents kicked you out of the house,
right.
you had to make that up. You had to go find the microdot in the local kind of weird woods, right?
Totally. I mean, I think about, who's it? Alistair Humphreys does that. He talks about sort of micro adventures and things like that all the time. And that idea of finding that where you are. And so as a kid, without even knowing it, we were all doing that. But as far as connecting on a deeper level to maybe a more traditional view of the outdoors, for me, that was when through the Boys and Girls Club, first of all, I started going to the club when I was 5. You were supposed to be 6, so breaking the rules. Also, it was just called the Boys Club back then still. And I was not a boy, so they still let me in, and I'm really grateful. But they had a summer camp about 30 minutes outside of Milwaukee, Camp Whitcomb Mason. And it was a revelation to go out there because just as we were talking about backpacking and that idea of being away from the noise and all of these things coming at you all the time, camp was the first experience of that for me. You go out to this place where it was a pretty big property. I'm not sure how large, but it was large enough that as a kid, I felt like it was endless. There was no boundary. Once you went through the front gates, you were in this magical realm of pine trees and open fields. And there was a wetland with a boardwalk through it, a lake that we could go canoeing on. And it was a really special place for me. And I came to have a deep connection to the smell of pine trees, to the feel of wading through a wetland and, the waders and looking at all the little critters that lived in the mud, being out on that lake at all hours. And so that, I think, was probably what really solidified for me those feelings I even had as a younger kid being outside. It was like, oh, there's this whole other version of outside. What is this about? And how can I get more?
So professionally, you've written a guidebook to the PCT, and you're also engaged now in work on a book on the John Muir Trail, also called the Numupoyo Trail. And why don't you tell us a bit about your connection both to the PCT as well as the John Muir Trail? Why is this place so important to you, and why have you dedicated yourself to it?
Let's go back to when I was a little kid in Milwaukee, running around in the alleys. I was always a writer. I've always written. I used to make magazines and stories for my mom. For some reason, they were all like murder mysteries. I read a lot of Nancy Drew as a kid. I always wanted to be a writer, but I convinced myself as I got older that it wasn't a viable career, as I say this to a journalist.
That's correct.
Yes, anybody listening.
Dumbass career, yeah.
Terrible. Yeah, and I'm saying this as somebody who ended up spending 5 years totally freelance writing and eking out a living and living out my wildest writer dreams. But part of that was my friend Brooke and I found a 1947 Girl Scout handbook, and we decided to spend a year trying to earn all the badges. As we started a blog. Yeah, it's a wild idea. There were
on your own.
On
yeah.
our own.
Love it.
There were 100 badges in this book, so we weren't going to do it. But we called it Year of the Scout, and we started a blog mostly to keep ourselves, to document it for ourselves. And without my knowledge, my friend Casey, he's an amazing writer. He does TV writing and he's written several books and he runs a website called Modern Hiker. He had asked me to start writing for him, if I wanted to start writing for him just for fun, which I really enjoyed. I used to actually be a music journalist. I wrote for an alt weekly on the East Coast, the Charleston City paper, and I've written for other magazines in the past, But I'd kind of given up music writing when I moved out to LA. So Brooke and I are doing this project, trying to earn our badges. It was an absolute riot. Wrote this blog. Casey, without telling me, passed it to Mountaineers Books. They saw it. They reached out to me and said, hey, we are launching a guidebook series on the Pacific Crest Trail, and we're looking for somebody to write about Southern California, the trail between the border and Tuolumne Meadows in Yosemite, 942.5 miles, give or take. And they're like, do you want to send us a proposal? I was like, what? How does a potential book deal just fall into your lap? So I decided to roll with it. I had hiked bits and pieces of the PCT. I'd always dreamed of hiking it, but I was too afraid to take time out of my day job. Growing up, maybe a little financially insecure, I'll say, I've always valued the idea of being able to take care of myself. I was worried like, oh, I don't think I could do that because what if I can't, make enough money to pay my bills and I just need to stay at this job and blah, 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 live the American dream of work, work, work. But yeah, so I sent them a proposal. They liked it. And so suddenly I was on the hook for writing a whole book covering about 1,000 miles of trail. So it changed my life. But it's funny because my relationship with the PCT was kind of piecemeal. So it was like, oh, I've hiked this section, I've hiked that. I really wanted to hike it, but I can't. And now, I kind of have to hike it, or at least hike that first 1,000 miles. I started that summer of 2015 and it changed my life. It was the first time I'd backpacked solo. It was the first time I'd, encountered a lot of things. I ran into a mountain lion on the trail, had some bear encounters, got stuck in a snowstorm, all sorts of stuff. But the end result was that it really deepened my love for backpacking. It deepened my love for what you get to do when you set out on foot. To see the place you live from sort of over 1,000 miles almost, from the desert to snowy peaks in the Sierra is a wild experience. And then driving home was an even wilder experience, thinking how long it took to hike all that. No matter how many times I go out there, it still reveals new aspects to me every single time. And it reveals new aspects of myself every single time I'm out there. You don't go into these places and emerge unchanged. Whether you get this injection of joy or you feel a new confidence or empowerment from it, or you have a spiritual connection out there. There's so many things that happen on long trails. And the Sierra, so the JMT Numupoyo coincides with the PCT for about 200 miles, maybe a little less actually, but they're the same trail. So for me, deciding to write a book, which we haven't announced yet. So this is kind of like a little soft launch on Open Container.
Love it. Flirting at the trailhead.
That's right. But yeah, deciding to do that, my publisher had asked me a few times, we want you to write another book. I was like, I'm never writing a guidebook again. When they approached me about possibly doing What About This Trail, I said, oh, nope. I don't want to write a guidebook, but I want to write a different kind of book. And they said, all right, what do you got? I sent a 16-page proposal because I'm an overachiever. But I also really wanted to make sure they understood my vision, which was to talk about this trail that coincides with this other trail I love and this place that I love, where I've had groundbreaking personal experiences and deep, growth. But talk about it at a human level. What are the different ways that people connect with place? And using this trail as a way to explore that. And not talk about a trail as a thing to conquer, as something to check off a list, but as something deeper, talking about the emotions of being out there, talking about our connection to the land and how we can be in good relation with it, things like that. So it's not going to be a very traditional guidebook in that sense. And I'm very excited about that.
And the John Muir Trail itself, what is it? Where does it go? How long is it?
The trail itself. Now, here's the thing. I'm going to throw y'all for a loop because the JMT is a very popular trail, like bucket list for people around the world. Every year you got people coming from all over the place and a mere tiny fraction ever get permits. So traditionally, people think of it as running, give or take about 211 miles between Yosemite Valley, Happy Isles, and the summit of Mount Whitney, Tumunguya. I want to say it's the Shoshone name. The reality is this trail is not governed by any one entity. Like the PCTA is the Pacific Crest Trail Association. So they govern the PCT, and I'm using govern very loosely. So they acquire funding, they do trail maintenance, they protect parcels of land that protect sort of the trail routing. There is a JMT conservancy that does trail work, and they do scientific studies, and they do remediation on areas that have been, overcamped and things like that. But the JMT itself is a concept. There's a lot of argument about kind of who came up with it. Theodore Solomons is widely considered sort of the first person to have an idea of connecting a trail along the Sierra Crest. But there are a ton of people who came after him and while he was even exploring his options that helped piece together what would become the trail. And ultimately, it was actually the Sierra Club who gathered the funding. They've got federal funding, they got private funding from members, and started really working on the construction along with federal partners. And this was over 100 years ago that this all started being conceived. The JMT is technically a trail that goes from Happy Isles to Mount Whitney, but it's run different courses in that time. There's old portions of the trail you can still travel if you're decent at navigation that then got rerouted for different reasons. The trail is what you want it to be. Like, you can follow this routing, and sure, you can follow what a guidebook says, go from point A to point B, but your experience isn't going to be mine out there. Like, even though you and I are pretty similar, Doug, I think you would have a different experience, and you may choose a different side quest here and there than I would, and you would camp in different places and see different sunrises and sunsets, and the experience is not universal out there at all.
I love that. And isn't the trails often blocked, right? It's up in the high alpine, so it's often snow covered, doesn't melt out some years. Is that correct, right?
Yeah, I mean, this summer I started hiking in late June because we had a bit of an average snowfall year, so there was still some snow on the trail, but not a ton. I was out there in August 2023 after a record snow year. I had crampons and an ice axe and spikes with me in August, which is very rare for travel in the High Sierra then. But yeah, it's covered in snow through much of the year. People have skied it. There's some guys, Trauma and Pepper are their trail names, who traversed the whole PCT in the winter some years ago during the drought. And it changes every year. In 2023, we had crazy avalanches after that, with that high snow year. We had bridges broken and twisted and turned. This year going through, and even in last year, you see areas of the trail that just got hammered by these avalanches, and the trees are all bent off in the middle and broken like pickup sticks. And it was an obstacle. It was like a Tough Mudder obstacle course or something out there. It was a little intense.
And I think there's really something important about this trail too. Obviously, it's named after John Muir, famous conservationist, someone without whom we probably wouldn't have a lot of the public lands we have now. But also, there's an alternative name for it that I really like, which is the Numupoyo Trail. As you said before, it's the People's Path. What a beautiful name for a trail.
Oh, yeah.
Do you think we should just call it the Numupoyo Trail? Wouldn't that make more sense?
Oh my gosh, I would love that. I think it's a beautiful name to kind of share like my thinking behind this. So there's a lake along the trail. Just before you get going southbound, you get to a place called Silver Pass. And it used to have a name that was a derogatory name for Native women. And that was changed under Interior Secretary Deb Haaland, who did a lot of work in changing kind of like really inappropriate place names. And so now the name of that lake is Numuhuhupi, which basically means like Paiute woman. And it's an honor now and not a slur. And so I think about when you go to the name, the John Muir Trail, it was named by the Sierra Club folks who funded the construction to sort of tie together what was in part trails that had already been, walked in by Native people who have been going over these mountains forever. So part of the trail was using existing routes that Indigenous people have used in these mountains for a long time. And then part of the trail was absolutely constructed. You had to blast through rock. They had to do a lot of route finding to figure out the right place. So they decided to name this trail after John Muir, who never walked the trail itself, which is a big misconception people have, although obviously he was all over the Sierra. And so they did it to sort of honor him and honor his legacy. There's been a lot of debate. The Sierra Club actually led a lot of conversations in partnership with Jolie and some of the other folks with Indigenous Women Hike, talking about, hey, can we petition or can we support these women in their quest to sort of get the trail renamed? And I was all for it. I said, the thing is, Muir's got a million things named after him in this country. Indigenous women, not so much. Indigenous people, not so much. Which is pretty messed up when you think about it. So I think it's a beautiful name, just like I think Numuhuhupi is a beautiful name, just like I think Denali is a beautiful name. And I'm glad that despite the current administration's bullshit endeavors, that most people now do think of it as Denali instead of McKinley. Yeah, I think it would be incredible, even if they wanted to keep John Muir Trail, Numupoyo, if we made that like the name. Okay, I would take that as a concession.
Well, let's think first of all in Denali, the people who can actually climb it, the people who can actually spend time on it, know it, live it, love on it, they all want to call it Denali, not the people who have absolutely no connection to it. I mean, I love this idea. For me, I always want to know what the native name was of a peak or a lake or a place. It's so horrible that these things have been erased, the name that something has had for generations to people who are truly linked to it. So I love this idea. And I think we should do more of it, really, instead of these names that to be honest, were just dumbass names tacked onto things
Yes.
by people who've never been there or seen them,
Dude, it's either that or in the Sierra in particular, a lot of as I was doing research for this book I'm writing right now, I started becoming really infuriated because there's these big examples like Numupoyo and things like that, but there's all of these other examples of basically these guys who were scouting this trail or scouting other parts of the Sierra just started naming peaks after these dudes that they either knew who were in their scouting party or that they admired. So you've got stuff named after Joseph LeConte, who is a eugenicist. Stuff like that is bad. And so, yeah, maybe not every peak had a name before, but a lot of these places did, or they were referenced in some way by the people who were living in the Owens Valley who were looking up at these peaks. Certainly they had names, and some of them have come to light, like Whitney being Tumaguya. And it's wild to me just to think that some guys just went through and were like, yep, we're going to name that one, after my buddy, and this one's after my buddy, and it was just a few guys that named a lot of places in the Sierra.
I think it's the same thing with land acknowledgements too. I mean, we want to rename these places, but at the same time, we want to actually do something for the communities, whose language we're using, whose places we've stolen. And I think that's a great thing. If I want to rename a place, I should be supporting Indigenous women hike as well as should be supporting, efforts to help Native communities, maybe even have land back. And, there's a lot to think about. So hopefully thinking about the names of these places also makes us think about the history behind it and how we can help the people who've been displaced, who we're forgetting, instead of just using their names.
Yeah, I mean, it's wild to me that in 2025, we still don't have every tribe in this country should have representation in the government. We should have, and I'm talking at all levels of government, not just federal. Why aren't tribes part of the conversations? We finally saw it with Bears Ears and Grand Staircase and some of the places in Utah. But why isn't this more widespread? Why aren't parks partnering with the tribes whose land we're stewards? I don't usually talk about land and ownership, so I wouldn't say that own these lands. I'd say the original stewards of these places, the people who were deeply and are deeply still connected to these places, should be involved in the decision making. It's so stupid to me that it's not that way.
Yeah, I think Bears Ears is a great example too, where we really had this great chance, to really manage a place with land and people connected and remembering the people in that land. We look at the ruins in Bears Ears and there used to be this idea that those people disappeared, they went nowhere. It's no, these people are here. They're still here. Their ancestors are still here. So the idea as we move forward that these places could be managed not just for land, but for people as well, I think is really powerful. And boy, is it really anathema to our current administration who would rather just wipe them off the face of the earth, as some of them have said, which is really awful.
Yeah, that, and then extract, instead of figuring out how can we balance things out a little bit better. We're pretty, in a lot of ways, I look at what's going on now with our, lack thereof of environmental policy, and it's because we're out of balance. We're out of balance as a society. We want to talk about this specific to nature. Most people in the United States grow up feeling disconnected from nature. Nature is a concept. You go to nature. You don't live in nature. You're not of nature, but really we are. But we're taught we're not. So, I think about all the things I always wished for is why not have environmental ed, nature teachings in our schools from preschool, kindergarten onward? Why not have more opportunities for adults? I think about all the accidents that happen in parks and in other outdoor areas. And a lot of it comes down to ignorance, right? People just don't know how to be in a place safely sometimes. And so it's if we had this from a young age where we all grew up feeling like we were part of the whole instead of separate from it, I feel like we'd be in a much better place politically right now, perhaps, and environmentally, of course.
Yeah, I think looking at how ecosystems work and, being out there in the wild, seeing what ecosystems work well, that work symbiotically, that work with a diversity of life all thriving really is a good model for how we can run other things. Getting away from the wilderness as well, I think something we touched on a little bit earlier, but I'd like to go deeper into. When we did the outdoor town draft on the Rock Fight, you chose New York City and LA as some of the best outdoor towns. And some people got upset, but you won the draft, you won the contest, according to the listeners. So why are LA and New York the most urban places in the United States?
So I've lived in both places, so I can speak to this from a very firsthand experience. Both places have built into the framework of their cities, first of all, large parks. Central Park in New York and Griffith Park here in LA. But then we've got other large parks. LA, we've got Elysian, for instance. New York, you've got Prospect Park and so on. There's parks built in, and these were part of the city fabric for both places. And as outdoor recreation became more popular, I'd say especially when you're thinking about 70s and the 80s, and more people started getting out and doing things, more gear was developed to sort of encourage people to get out and do things. You'd see run clubs and you'd see people kayaking on the LA River. And now there's, guided tours and things like that. LA, of course, we have a climate that allows you to be outside year round. Both cities have public transportation that'll get you into these places, get you to the parks. They can even get you slightly outside the city to go to different trails and things like that. You've got bike paths, you've got water access in both cities. Different, of course. Like, I don't necessarily want to go paddle the Gowanus Canal, but not to say that people don't. But you have migratory bird paths in both places. There's so many ways that these are outdoor cities. LA did this amazing thing. I actually wrote about it for Outside Magazine a couple years ago. LA, we had back in the day this million tree planting kind of, mayor campaign. But then it evolved into like really trying to reduce urban heat. And so in cities, you see, if you go back, I'm going to get a little nerdy poli-sci here, but you could talk about redlining. And redlining was simply this idea that certain neighborhoods were seen as undesirable. And we're talking Black and brown neighborhoods. And this is where highways were built back in the day. And then when you had highways, you would put in the big box stores and so on. And you'd then also, as part of this, there's a specific subset of policing around landscape and how foliage is an impediment to crime fighting. And so we've got to take down trees and we've got to take down hedges in these bad neighborhoods. And I forget the name of it. There's a jaunty little acronym, but it's actually part of police design to take trees and greenery out of these neighborhoods. It's awful. And so you've got neighborhoods that are hotter. You've got neighborhoods that are by the highways and getting all these emissions. And there's proven higher rates of asthma in these places with kids. And LA is actually doing something very active. They've been working with USC, Google, and some other folks to use a variety of different technologies, to use on-the-ground groups like Tree People and Eastside Trees and everything, to basically do mass tree plantings, give trees away to people, but also do public education and work within the framework they have as a city government to try to improve tree canopy across the city, not just in wealthy places like Beverly Hills. And it's wild. So I would say their environmental efforts in New York, Trust for Public Land has done an amazing job linking together and growing green space in small places, because New York is a tiny, Manhattan's tiny. But in schoolyards and things like that, they've done a lot of work greening it. So both cities are also super committed to greening up their cities and in service of the people and the animals who live there. So I still stand by those picks. I think they're great outdoor towns.
Well, and I think as we exponentially continue to grow as a species, we're going to have to be more urban. And to survive in urban environments, we're going to have to still retain this primal connection to the outdoors in some way, right?
I can even feel it in myself if I don't get outside for a day or two. I'm outside just about every day here, even if it's just this morning I did a 2-mile walk to go to the bank and back. I start to feel weird inside if I don't have that connection. I even love just looking outside my window and seeing plants. I have an herb garden going right now. It is a part of us. And I wish that more people felt safe exploring that connection and understanding that this nature, the outdoors, capital O, doesn't have to be this far away thing and this scary thing. There's a place there for all of us. And we have to find it. Like, we have to. Otherwise, I don't know what's going to happen to us as a species.
Well, let's take a moment to do some self-promotion. Let's talk about your new Rock Fight podcast, Gear Abbey. Where did it come from? What was the idea? Why are we getting Gear Abbey?
So Gear Abbey, of course, is a play for people of our generation will know what I'm talking about. Dear Abby, which is a long-running advice column. But so one day I was listening, about a year ago exactly, it was last fall, I was listening to an episode of The Rock Fight. It was Colin and Justin bantering as they do. And one of them mentioned something about, oh, you know what? We should have Shawnté just answer people's questions. And I texted them. I remember I was driving up to Yosemite. I was going to hike up to Clouds Rest that day. And right before I got into the park, I'd been listening and I texted them before I lost service. I was like, I'll be your gear, Abby, kind of as a joke. And we ended up saying, wait, maybe there's something here. And Colin, if the listeners have listened to Colin at all on the Rock Fight, he's just like a exuberant ideas guy.
Yes,
and
he
he
is.
will try his best to make the ideas come to life, which I
And he
appreciate.
does. He makes them happen.
He does. Yeah. That's what I love. He's not just a thinker or an imagineer, but he actually does the things. So we just spent a long time talking about it. And I said, for me, I went to school originally, to college, to be an environmental educator, be a park ranger maybe. I ended up becoming a school social worker. But that part of me that has always wanted to give back and educate is always been within me. And so I taught for about 6 years as part of the Sierra Club's Wilderness Travel course, which is a super cool 10-week course. All the instructors are volunteers. We take people on field trips. We teach them how to navigate, how to be a good steward of the land while they're out there, how to feel comfortable filtering water and go to the bathroom and doing all the stuff you do on a backpacking trip. And I've taken people on so many trips. I can't count how many, up into the Sierra, into the desert, stuff like that. I've taught classes with Kula Cloth, with The Adventurous. I love education. I used to write a sex column when I wrote for the Alt Weekly under a pseudonym, so nobody knew it was me except for my editor. But we're like, why?
Not the people you were dating, right?
No. But yeah, we're like, what? Let's just kind of roll this all into this one podcast where I could be funny and irreverent and silly, but also hopefully lay down some education for people, help inspire people to maybe try some things they haven't, help people feel empowered if maybe they had a question about something they're too embarrassed to ask somebody else. Yeah, the thought is really like, hey, I think about all of the people in my life that helped me become the person I am today. And, if we're thinking about the outdoors, like I had mentors. It's not as common when you think about hiking, cycling, paddling, all of that stuff than it is hunting and fishing. It's way more common to have mentors in those outdoor pursuits. So why not try to sort of expand my role as an outdoor, mentor or educator in a very different kind of way through the podcast? So that's the hope.
And how is it going to be different than any podcast we've ever heard before?
It's essentially an advice column in podcast form. I am using my own experience, but also doing research. I'm calling on experts sometimes, and I'm trying to keep it lighthearted and fun. So it's fun to listen to, but also getting to the heart of what the question is. And I'm not a shill for any sort of brand or anything like that. So it's all pretty independent. I mean, it's very much in the Rock Fight mold. A little bit of irreverence, a little bit of throwing rocks, but also never at the person who's asking the question. I have mad respect for anyone who wants to know more and is trying to seek out additional knowledge in their life. And so I approach it with that sort of loving big sister vibe is how I'd put it. So yeah, I think it's fun, it's funny, but it's also hopefully thoughtful and insightful for people.
I'm certainly excited to hear about gear. I'm always like, how can we do gear in a different way? So I am really excited to hear it through the lens of you educating and bringing all your sex column, rock drummer, Boys and Girls Club background, passion for the outdoors into this. And I love that it's really going to be about education.
Yeah, we'll get some laughs. There will be laughs, but I really do think that education is the big thing. And also just turning the outdoor industry, if you want to put it that way, and even outdoor media, I think is still very bro-focused. And I think we've made some real long strides since since I started writing for Outside or whomever. But it still does feel, you go to a trade show and you see it even, it still feels very much like a male-dominated space. And so if I can provide a different voice, I want to try to do that. So, but a voice that welcomes all people, but a voice that also is going to have fun with it.
I'm excited to listen.
Oh, thanks, Doug.
I guess I'm sort of a bro. I don't know.
I don't know. I don't think of you as a bro at all.
I bro.
Think you're a deep well. You could bro. I could bro too. We can all bro. We've broed on the podcast together.
I interviewed Shane McConkey once, and he told me about people coming up to him and trying to talk to him at bars and stuff, or being sort of a local celebrity, and he'd be like, "Look, I don't want to bro right now. I just want to hang out with my friends." We're getting near the end now, so how can people find Gear Abby? How can they learn more about you and what you do? How can they get your books? give us your PR pitch right now.
Oh my gosh. Well, I do have a website that is sorely in need of an update, which I shall obviously do before this episode comes out. Thanks for the inspiration, Doug. It's just my name, ShawntéSalabert.com. Gear Abby, we're going to host that. That's with the Rock Fight Podcast Network. So if you go rockfight.co, we'll have Gear Abby on the site. And then you'll be able to listen to it anywhere you listen to podcasts. And also, people can send their questions to me. And this is what I really want. I want your honest questions. You can ask questions about anything. Honestly, I'm not, unless it's a kind of a jerkwad of a question that's sexist, racist, whatnot, ableist, I'll answer your questions. So send it to myrockfight@gmail.com, myrockfight@gmail.com. As far as my books, I always try to get people to go to indie booksellers. I love going to bookshops. It is one of my greatest joys in life. Or if you go to a visitor center at anywhere in Southern California or just California parks and rec areas, you'll probably find it there. But it's Hiking the Pacific Crest Trail, Southern California. I've also been in a couple other books, including the Campfire Stories, Volume 2, which came out in Mountaineers. Wrote a little story about how I always craved enchiladas on trail. A little poetic piece about my favorite food. But yeah, I'm around. I'm on Instagram, the whole shebang.
I am more than willing to go eat enchiladas next time we have you on Open Container, because there will be a next time. And I can't wait for that. And I'm going to leave you with the last question that we ask everyone as the last question on this show. And that is simply, what gives you hope?
I get hope in two ways. I'd say first, I look at the people around me who are rising above the noise, rising above all of the bad stuff happening right now. I live in Pasadena, a block away from my house. A bunch of men were taken from a bus stop by people, supposed ICE agents. And it set off, a whole nationwide scenario where now you've got a lawsuit against the federal government because of what happened a block away from my house. So I look at people who are standing up to tyranny. I look at people who are rising despite being pushed down, and I will always have hope when I see that. I also will always have hope when I go into nature and I see a flower, when I see a green leaf, when I see an animal, hear a bird chirping. And it's a reminder for me that I am just a small bit of the whole, that sometimes it's important to sort of zoom out and look at life that way and not make yourself the center of it all. And it really grounds me a lot. So I will say nature gives me hope and good people fighting the good fight.
Shawnté Salabert, I cannot thank you enough for being on Open Container. I know you'll be on again. Thank you.
Oh, thanks, Doug. What a pleasure. I feel so honored.
Thanks for imbibing Open Container, a production of Rockfight LLC. Be sure to tune in to Shawnté and Gear Abby on the Rockfight Network. Please take a second to follow our show on whatever podcast app you're listening to us on, and send your emails and feedback to myrockfight@gmail.com. Our producers today were David Karstad and Colin True. Art direction provided by Sarah Gensert. I'm Doug Schnitzbahn. Get some. Thanks for listening. All good? Dude, I want that contract extension.